The mountain caught the sound before Silas Crow did, a flat, wet crack that came up off the Mercer place and hung in the cold air like something that did not want to fall. Then the woman went down in the frozen yard, both arms wrapped around the swell of her belly, and the man standing over her drew his boot back again. Silas was 40 yards out on the Frost Creek Road with a sack of flour across his saddle, and no earthly business there at all. He had buried his own pregnant wife 2 winters back. He turned the horse. If your chest just went tight, if some part of you is already standing up out of your chair to walk down into that yard yourself, then stay with me, 'cause this story was made for you. Subscribe to this channel and ring the bell so the next story finds you, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Then come back to that frozen Montana yard in the winter of 1884, because what the mountain man did next was not what one soul in Frost Creek would have guessed, and it changed all of it. Nora Mercer had been married 4 years, and she had learned to read a man's hands the way a sailor reads weather. Not because she wanted to, but because reading wrong had a price she had paid more than once. She had learned that a quiet house was not a safe one. She had learned that the day after was always gentle, full of apology and small kindnesses, and that the gentleness was a tax she paid for the next time. She was 26 years old, 7 months gone with her first living child, and she had stopped, somewhere in the last year, expecting to be rescued. A woman does not waste hope she cannot afford. That same morning, before any of it, she had walked into Frost Creek for thread and a tin of soda, and the town had done to her what towns did. She was not a small woman. She had never been a small woman, not as a girl in Ohio and not as a bride stepping off the coach into Montana, and she had long ago made her private peace with the size of her. The town had not. She felt their eyes travel her the old way, top to bottom, slow, the way you measure a wardrobe to see if it will clear a doorway, and then she felt the second look, the one that found the yellow-green mark along her jaw and slid away fast, because a bruise on a married woman was the kind of thing a person in Frost Creek had decided long ago was none of theirs to see. Behind her a voice said, not lowered, that Mercer. Woman, Lord, the size of her, and him so trim, a laugh. Nora Mercer did not stop walking. She had learned that stopping only gave them the pleasure of watching it land. The woman behind the mercantile counter was kinder, or only lonelier, and she talked the way some people breathe. There was a man up on Crow Mountain, she said, weighing the soda, Silas Crow, who had come down off that ridge maybe 6 times in 2 years, lost his wife to a hard birth, the baby with her, and a little girl left behind who they said had not spoken a full sentence since. Folks called him the hermit, called him worse when the wind was right. Keeps to himself and his guns, the woman said, and his sorrow. She said it the way people say a thing they have decided is finished. She was wrong about that, the way the whole town was wrong, but no one knew it yet. Silas's cabin, when he finally carried Nora up to it that afternoon, half frozen, silent, her shawl stiff with the blood from her split lip, was worse than a stranger would expect, and better than a stranger would understand. The yard had gone to weeds under the snow. The barn door hung from one hinge at a tired angle, the way a thing hangs when the man who owns it stops seeing it. Not laziness. Grief has a look, and the look is neglect. He had stopped tending surfaces the day the woman who made surfaces matter to him was put in the ground. He set her down inside without ceremony. You'll stay till the child comes, he said. After that's your business. He was a tall man, dark, weathered to the color of the mountain itself, and he spoke the way he did everything, like words cost him, and he meant to spend few. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what the man in the yard was to her, though he had seen the ring and she had seen him see it. Nora, she said anyway. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I won't be trouble to you. I can earn my keep. I cook, I clean. I can do near anything that needs 2 hands. She looked, for the first time, at the room she had been carried into. It was a disaster, and it told the truth. The stove was cake black with the burnt-on ghosts of 100 poor suppers. The basin smelled of standing water and something gone over. A child's pinafore lay folded on a chair the way a thing is folded by a man who does not know what else to do with it. And in the corner of it all stood a little girl, perhaps 6, with her mother's coloring and her father's stillness, watching Nora with eyes that had decided long ago not to expect much. That's Pearl, Silas said. He did not soften when he said it. He walled it off, the way he walled everything. She don't talk much. He took his rifle from the door and went back out into the cold before Nora could answer, because answering was a thing that led to other things. Nora stood in the wreck of that kitchen a long moment, one hand on the small of her own aching back. Then she rolled her sleeves to the elbow and began. She did not announce any of what she did over the next 11 days, and that was the whole of why it worked. She scrubbed the stove down to its black iron bones and blacked it fresh. She boiled the basin clean and set the window cloth to soak. She found the flour barrel half spoiled and threw out the top third and to save the rest, and she found behind it a crock of sourdough gone gray and sleeping that she fed back to life with her own hands over 3 patient days. She mended the pinafore. She did not ask permission for any of it. She had learned a long time ago that a woman who waits to be told she is allowed will wait her whole life. On the second night she made bread. She knew what she was doing when she did it, though she would not have said so. She had seen the way the man ate, standing fast like a thing he resented needing, and she had seen the way the child did not eat at all so much as accept what was put in front of her and forget it. So she let the loaves go long and slow, and when she pulled them from that newly blacked oven, the smell of them filled the cabin the way light fills a room, warm and yeasty and impossible to ignore, the smell of a kitchen where somebody is alive and means to keep being. She cut the heel off the first loaf while it still steamed and laid butter into it and set it down in front of Pearl without a word, the way you set water near a wild thing and step back. The girl looked at it. She looked at Nora. She picked it up in both small hands and bit, and something moved across her face that she was too young to hide, a kind of startled, helpless pleasure, the look of a body remembering it is allowed to want something. She ate the whole of it and licked the butter from her thumb. Then she said, in a small, rusty voice that had plainly not been used much lately, "Can I have the other end, too?" It was the most words anyone in that cabin had heard the child say in a year. Silas had come in from the cold during it, and he had stopped in the doorway, and he stood there holding an armload of split wood and did not move and did not speak, and the look on his face was not one Nora was meant to see, so she did not turn around. She cut the other end and buttered it and gave it to the girl. The man set the wood down very carefully, as though it had become breakable, and went back out into the dark. That night he ate sitting down. It was a small thing, and it was not a small thing. For 2 years he had eaten the way a man does a chore, standing at the counter with his back to the empty chairs. But that night Nora set 3 places and ladled out a stew thick with what she had, salvaged from his ruined stores, and she sat and the child sat, and after a long moment in the doorway the man came and sat too. He ate slow. He ate the way a body eats when it is remembering it is allowed to. He did not look up much, and he did not say the food was good, because saying it would have meant saying a great many other things he was not ready to say. But he had a second bowl, Nora noticed. She did not remark on it. She had learned that the surest way to send a half-tamed thing back into the dark is to name the moment it begins to trust. He never said one word about the bread. But the next morning there was a fresh split stack of firewood stacked high outside her door, a great deal more than one woman and a small girl would need, and she had not asked for it, and he did not mention it, and neither did she. He did not answer kindness with words. He answered it the way he answered everything that mattered, which was with his hands. She found other things that wanted doing, and she did them the way she did all of it, without waiting to be thanked or watched. The well rope had frayed down to 3 strands, and she spliced it before it could part and dropped the bucket for good. She saw that the one good window had been letting weather in around a cracked pane, and she fit a folded square of oilcloth into the gap with flour paste until the draft died in the night. She noticed, more than any of that, the way the child coughed in the gray hour before dawn, a tight barking thing, and traced it to the damp in the back room and the cold that pooled along its floor, and she moved Pearl's cot out beside the warm stove without announcing why, and inside 3 days the cough was gone. She did not say a word about any of it. She had never learned the trick of doing a thing loudly. She had only ever learned to do it. The night came, in the second week, when Pearl woke screaming from a dream she had no words to name. Silas, who slept light the way all grieving men sleep, was already half across the floor before Nora caught his eye and shook her head once. He stopped. He let her go to the child instead. She gathered the girl against the great warm bulk of herself, the body the town had laughed at in the road, the body that made, it turned out, a fine soft place for a frightened child to land. And she did not tell her there was nothing to fear, because that is a lie children always catch. She told her instead that she was here, and the door was barred, and that she had never once in her life let go of a things she meant to keep. She held her until the trembling went out of her, and the small breath went long and even. Across the room in the dark, Silas Crow sat in his chair and did not sleep and did not speak, and watched the two of them the way a man watches a fire he is half afraid to believe is really burning. She had been there 9 days when she found the room. She had only meant to find Rags, and instead she found the small back room he kept shut, and in it a cradle and a trunk, and folded inside the trunk a woman's clothes that still, faintly, held a woman's smell and a tin of letters and a daguerreotype of a young woman laughing at whoever held the camera, Ada. The name was on the letters. Nora did not read them. She closed the trunk the way you close a wound you did not mean to open, and she understood then exactly what she had walked into, not a hermit's coldness, but a grief so total it had frozen a man solid in the same hour it took his wife, and she understood, too, the thing he had not said about why a man would turn his horse around for a stranger in another man's yard. He had not been able to save his own. He was not going to walk past another. Del Mercer came up the mountain on the 12th day, and he did not come alone, and he did not come quiet. He brought Sheriff Voss, who owed the Mercers money, and 2 men from town, and the law itself riding plain on his face, because the law in Montana in the winter of 1884 was on Del Mercer's side, and every soul on that mountain knew it. A wife was a husband's property the way a horse was, the way a fence was. Del stood in the cleared yard with the sheriff at his shoulder, and he was, as he always was in front of an audience, the picture of a wronged and patient man. "I've come for my wife," he said, "and my child she's carrying. A man's got a right." He looked up at the cabin and he smiled, and the smile was the worst thing about him, because it knew it had already won. Inside, Nora's hands had gone cold. She had Pearl behind her and her own arms around her belly the old way, and she was already doing the arithmetic of survival she had done her whole married life. What it would cost to go quietly, what it would cost not to. And Silas Crow, who had said perhaps 200 words to her in 12 days, finally spoke. Not to Del, to her. He stood at the window with his rifle held down, not raised, and he said low, in the language of a man who had kept something shut a long time and felt the door give all at once. "My Ada was carrying when she went. 40 miles of snow." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I was 3 hours too late. I have spent 2 years deciding there wasn't a thing on God's earth I could have done." He looked at her then, full on, the first time. "Turns out there was. I just got the chance late." Nora did not tell him it was not his fault. She did not reach for him or fill the silence with comfort, because she had learned that some things a person has to set down themselves, and that hands laid on too soon only make them grip harder. She simply crossed the room and stood at the window beside him, her shoulder near his, and stayed, which was its own kind of answer. The kind am here, and this is real, and I am not going to pretend it is anything smaller than it is. It was the truest moment that cabin had held in 2 years, and it lasted the length of one held breath, and then there was a fist on the door, and the world came in. Del Mercer came through that door with the law at his back, and the certainty of a man who has never once been told no by anyone who could make it stick. He crossed the room toward Nora, with his hand already out to take her by the arm, the way he had taken it 100 times before. He did not reach her. Silas Crow stepped between them, did not raise the rifle, he did not raise his voice, only put the whole tall, weathered length of himself into the path, the way you drive a post where a post is meant to stay, and said one word, "No." Sheriff Voss moved his hand toward his belt, and then thought the better of it, because there is a stillness in certain men that a wise man does not test, and Silas Crow was full of it to the brim. Del looked at the rifle held low and the eyes held level above it, and for the first time in the whole of his bullying life he was the one in the room doing the arithmetic of what a thing might cost him. And then Silas said the thing none of them had come expecting, not a threat, not a price, but a place. "Not here," he said, "in town, in front of all of them." They settled it in Frost Creek 3 days later, in the long room behind the church that the town kept for its business, because Silas Crow had meant exactly what he said in that doorway. A man who hides a thing on a mountain looks guilty. A man who carries it down into the middle of the street, where every neighbor is made to look at it, is doing something else entirely. So the town came, the way a town comes to anything that smells of scandal. The women who had measured her in the road, the men who had decided a bruise was none of theirs. Sheriff Voss, the circuit judge down from Helena, by luck of the calendar. And Del Mercer stood up in his good coat and told his patient, wronged man's story. And it was a good story. and half the room had already chosen to believe it before he opened his mouth. Silas Crow had used few words his whole life. He used fewer now, and he used them plainly in front of every person in Frost Creek who had ever looked at Nora sideways. He did not make a speech. He stood up, and the room went quiet the way a room does when a man who never talks decides to. "I found him kicking her in the dirt," he said. "She was carrying. He'd done it before. You can ask the doctor about the rib that healed crooked, the one she never came in to set, because she was scared of what asking would cost her at home. You all knew. He let that sit on them, every face. You knew. And you called her too big and him too good for her, and you looked away. I'm a hermit. I came down off that mountain 6 times in 2 years, and I'm the only one in this valley who didn't look away." He sat down. He had said all of it he meant to say. The doctor stood then, because he could not now do otherwise, and told about the rib and the burns dressed as kitchen accidents and the things a small-town doctor knows and keeps. A woman who had laughed in the road 3 weeks back stood and said she had heard the screaming and told herself it was nothing. The judge from Helena, who did not owe the Mercers a dime and did not care for Sheriff Voss, asked Nora one question, and Nora answered it plainly with her ruined lip and her steady eyes, and that was the end of Del Mercer in Frost Creek. The judge granted the separation and the protection of the court, rare as that was, and bound Del over on the assault the doctor had sworn to, and Sheriff Voss found, suddenly, that the town had no further use for a sheriff who owed the wrong men money. Del Mercer rode out east before the next snow and did not come back. Some of the town changed its face toward Nora that day. Some only fell silent, defeated, which in a town like that is the same thing as justice. None of them ever measured her in the road again. The child came in the first true week of spring, in the cabin on Crow Mountain, with the windows open for the first time in 2 years, and the smell of bread in the walls. A girl, Nora named her Ada, and Silas Crow stood in the doorway of the small back room, the cradle dusted off now, the trunk aired, and its letters read aloud at last, the daughter who'd come before grown into the woman who'd come after. And he did not say the thing in his chest, because he had never been a man who said things. He crossed the room instead, and he put his rough hand against the new child's head, and that was the whole of his vow. Nora understood it. Pearl talks now. She talks the way a creek talks after a thaw, all day and to anyone, like a thing making up for lost time, and she has decided the baby belongs to her and follows her around the yard, narrating the world to her. The barn door hangs straight. There is smoke from the chimney every morning and bread cooling on the sill by noon, and in the evenings the mountain is what it has always been, large and cold and older than anything any of them have lived through, going about its seasons without consulting a single soul, covering its dead in winter and giving the living back to themselves in spring. 17 years on, in the spring of 1901, the girl named Ada was married under the cottonwood at the foot of Crow Mountain, and her sister Pearl talked straight through the ceremony, and the valley that had once looked away came up the road in its Sunday best to stand. Witness, because some lessons a place learns and keeps. Nora Crow stood at the edge of all of it and watched, with both hands resting easy on a body she had long ago stopped apologizing for. She had been told her whole life that she was too much, too big, too plain, too much trouble, too much woman to be loved easy. She had finally come to a country that knew there was no such thing as too much of a person. She did not need the valley's permission to belong there. She had stopped asking the day a silent man turned his horse around in the road. She knew exactly who she was, and she filled every inch of the life she had earned, and she was not going anywhere.